thank you so much for joining us. Over the past 3 days, Donald Trump's election loss has been certified. He's been banned from social media. He's broken with his vice president. He's now facing a second impeachment and potential disbarment from office. It is hard to think of a president who's brought a worse week upon himself.
Well, it's certainly been a terrible week, but I think it's been a terrible week for the country because we're seeing a lot of scapegoating going on over here as well, and a lot of political advantage and a search for a scalp over what happened here. The majority of Trump supporters, as your poll just showed, do not support what happened. Most were totally peaceful and just wanted to have a show of force, that we felt that there was a lot of shenanigans during the election and that it wasn't an honest election.
Okay, you say it wasn't an honest election. Here's a partial list of those who thought it was. Majorities in 50 state legislatures, 50 state governors, including many Republicans, the Supreme Court, numerous other courts, the Republican Attorney General, the Republican Vice President. Why couldn't Mr. Trump's supporters accept that?
Well, there were also hundreds of affidavits from people who said there was wrongdoing going on. And even Bill Barr, the Attorney General, who, yes, he's criticized President Trump now, but he did say that there was wrongdoing in this election.
On the 2nd of December, he said there was no fraud that changed the outcome of the race. 60 lawsuits, we can go back and through all this all day. 60 lawsuits were put in place. They were knocked down. Mr. Trump is now facing potential impeachment and also, perhaps worse for him, potential disbarment from office. That means that he couldn't run again in 2024.
All right. Well, look, this is the swamp taking control. The burning of the Reichstag was a pretext for Hitler to consolidate power and end democracy.
I think when we get to those comparisons, we take a little bit of a step back. And if you talk about the swamp, if you talk about scapegoats, there is another way of looking at scapegoating. It is simply a different word: accountability.
Look, there's accountability that should be appreciated from what the left has done as well. For 4 years, for 5 years, President Trump and his supporters were treated like scum. They pushed a Russian They pushed a Russian collusion lie on the public. They called him a traitor and an agent of Russia. They mocked Trump supporters as idiots. Isn't that a little incitement, James?
But what we're talking about now is not the left. We are talking about Mitch McConnell. We are talking about Mike Pence. We are talking about Bill Barr. We are talking about the Republican governor of Arizona. We are talking about the Republican governor of Georgia. These are all conservatives, and they are now on a different side from Mr. Trump.
And that's okay. I'm all for freedom of speech and different of opinions. But when you want to shut people up, and frankly, the Supreme Court is partly to blame.
The Supreme Court has a majority of Republican-appointed justices.
Hooray. Hooray.
Well, what more do you... I mean, I think some people watching...
James, they didn't want to hear the evidence. Martin Luther King said riots is the voice of the unheard. They should have heard the evidence.
Right, well...
They should have heard the evidence.
And the answer... Okay, here's the thing. They chose to rule the way they did. When there's a rule of law, and you know this, when there's a rule of law, it means you accept what the court says. You accept what 9 unarmed lawyers tell you. That is the definition of the rule of law. And in the year 2000, 9 unarmed lawyers said that Al Gore lost, and they had to accept that. If 9 unarmed lawyers impose the rule of law, why can't that simply be accepted?
That's great. And Hillary Clinton didn't accept the election because she said Trump is an illegitimate president. How many Democrats said that? And didn't that incite people to feel unheard and hated? How many Trump supporters have been beaten
Hillary
up?
Clinton's supporters did not raid the U.S. Capitol building to try to stop the certification of the election.
Okay, and most Trump supporters didn't do what happened.
But you say most Trump supporters is not the way that anyone ever measures these things. All you need is 1 or 2 or a few dozen, and that is still a major issue.
Yeah, and look what happened during the summer with Antifa and Black Lives Matter and riots and burnings going
Right, Black Lives
all
Matter
over
in the summer, of course. We covered all that extensively. We also noticed that by the White House, there was no attempt, as far as we've seen, as far as any evidence, to storm into the grounds of a federal building.
President Trump had to go into a bunker because they feared that the White House gates were going to be taken over, and he was mocked.
Well, we certainly haven't seen evidence of any attempt to break into a federal building like there was on Wednesday.
Okay, look, let me ask you, during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, do you remember people banging on the doors of the Supreme Court?
Steve Merczynski, it has been very interesting to speak to you, and I really appreciate you coming on BBC News. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, James.